Good afternoon. I am Tony Perry, and I am hosting today's episode of LVS Perspectives. I am here to discuss with you the mark of a new parent-led initiative called Education, Not Taxation, Parents Against School Fee VAT. I would like to thank LVS for the opportunity to share this with you today. My son is a year 6 student at the school. He's had a wonderful experience here, and I'll share with you today about how we got to that point, why, and also the effects that this school fee VAT policy will have on our family and many others. So let me just introduce myself. I am Tony Perry. As I mentioned, I have 2 children. I have a 10-year-old boy who is a year 6 student here, as well as an 8-year-old girl who is a year 4 student in a state school. My son also began in a state school, and from the very beginning he struggled to read, write, and spell. He was diagnosed with ADHD by the end of year 1. And we worked closely with his teachers, and they did the best that they could to support him, having TAs and others working with us. But even with that, of course, they had a class of 30 and other children with other needs. And despite their best efforts, my son continued to fall behind. He was struggling with sounding out words, being able to put words together, and writing, and it was quite difficult. And so in the end, after a lot of deliberation, my wife and I decided that we would move him to independent school. And we moved him to LVS Ascot in year 5. And we made that decision for 3 reasons. We had looked at at other schools, and there are many wonderful choices in our community, many wonderful schools. But there were 3 reasons that really moved us to LVS Ascot. The first was that LVS Ascot has a reputation for having a nurturing environment and being supportive for children with learning differences. The second reason is that it is a through school. So our son was moving across at the start of year 5. And so the idea of starting all over in a fresh school and then doing that again just a couple of years later didn't really make a lot of sense for us. And so the idea of him being able to settle in once and move through the school system throughout and truly feel a part of the community here, that resonated very strongly with us. The third reason that we chose LVS was because, like many independent school parents, we looked at the finances. And for us, we found that with careful planning and sacrifice, we were able to make it work. And so that's been our plan. And I will say that looking back, my son has been at LVS for a little over a year, so basically a year and a half term now. He's in the first term of year 6 now. And the improvement that we have seen has just been transformational. I now look at my son, I have him reading to me each evening, and he's actually piecing words together, even more complicated ones. He's reading signs whilst we're out and about. And it's just such a night and day difference. We also found that he has dyslexia and dysgraphia, which are challenges for reading, translating letter sound into words, and also with writing and making sense of those symbols as well. So those were parts of the challenges that he had. And LVS from the very beginning were very supportive to him. His teacher was very accommodating to his learning differences. The SENCO with the school and team were also very supportive. He's learned also about how to use his device, for example, to dictate. And that actually empowers him because he's able to get his ideas out before him. And so the improvement has just been night and day for us. So our plans were going very well until we learned about Labour's proposal to add school fee VAT or VAT to school fees. And that caused us quite a lot of concern because we had just moved him into this school and we were already working quite hard, my wife and I, to try to make ends meet. And so adding up to an additional 20% onto this was going to prove very difficult for us. And we don't know whether we're going to be able to make that work. And so I naturally started listening to some of the arguments that were being made for this policy. And that worried me more because frankly, they also did not add up in my mind. And so in October, I created a petition on change.org calling on Labour to stop their plan to add VAT to school fees, which is going to force kids to change schools. That's the crux of this. Is at the end of the day, if a family cannot afford school fees, they have to take their children to another school. And that means that they have to start all over again. And as parents, we don't know where they will be because it depends on what's available within a local authority. We don't know how much resource that they have got to support children like our son. And then, of course, having to start all over again to make friends was also going to prove very difficult. So it's kept us up many nights and has been the focus of many conversations. So as I said, we launched this at the end in October or end of September, and we have now had over 50, actually about 58,000 parents and supporters sign this petition, and that number is quickly growing now. Excuse me. And reading their stories, it really resonated to me that we are not alone. My family are not the only ones. I mean, as independent school parents, we don't typically go around talking about our finances and things. We get on with what we need to do, for ourselves, for our families, for our children and their schools. And so it's an uncomfortable conversation to have at the beginning, from the outset. And so seeing so many people sign on to this and reading their stories, it reinforced that fact that we are not alone. And there are many parents who have made many sacrifices for many different reasons. It could be anything from children needing additional support because of special education needs, children who have experienced racism, children who have been bullied, and many others. Parents that just want, like anyone, want to make the best, make the most of their education for their children. And so that resonated quite strongly. And I'd like to share with you just a couple of those stories now. So the first one, and I'm just going to read it directly. So my son has been severely bullied through primary school. I am sending him to private schools and found my choices are limited and he may not be bullied, and basically the parent are fearing that they'll be bullied within mainstream school. Excuse me, I can't quite read it from my own screen where I am. But the issue that this parent is having is that they move their child into an independent school to avoid bullying, and their choices are limited. And the fear is that they'll be bullied within a mainstream school if they have to return them back. And then the fears that their child's mental health will suffer. And the parent says, I do not agree with Labour's proposal. And it's not just the rich who sacrifice and have to make this kind of decision. And they add, I work in education. I know the consequences of sending your child to a school which is not right for them. And I think that most parents in the end can resonate with that or can relate to that. Anyone having a child, thinking about reception, coming into reception or coming into year 7 and thinking about school choice. This is something that's at the heart of every family's decision as they go to open days and so on. Second one is I am an autistic single mum of a 6-year-old boy who has been waiting 2 years for his autism diagnosis and speech and language therapy. I send him to an independent school because he simply wouldn't have his needs met in a state school. In order to be able to do this, there are certain sacrifices that have to be made, e.g. not going on holidays, etc. But I am prepared to do this, as it means that my son is in a school that he is happy and thriving in. And again, this is, I think at the end of the day, what every parent is trying to do. And I know that there's a lot of debate at the moment in saying, well, wait a minute, if you can afford to make this decision to send your child to private school, then it's really on you to be able to cover VAT and so on. There are also conversations that I know many labor leaders have made as well, many arguments about, well, independent schools are basically where children are being cosseted and apart from the real world, whereas state schools, people are really seeing the real world and suffering. And the argument that I would come back to that is that I feel that those are both overly generalized and simplified. There are a range of independent schools, just as there are a range of state schools. There are large independent schools, there are very small ones, there are secular ones, there are faith-based schools, there are cultural-based. For example, a French school or a Welsh school, right? And so there are a variety of reasons. There are schools that cater particularly for children with special education needs as well. And there are reasons that parents make these decisions. But this is no different from parents who are moving house to live in the catchment area of a popular state school, or parents tutoring their children to sit the 11 plus and going into grammar school. There is night and day between the wealthiest of state schools and the poorest of state schools. And I would argue the same in independent schools as well. So these are different choices. So whether someone is choosing to spend their resources to buy a bigger home and take on a bigger mortgage or to pay school fees, there's really not a difference in doing that. And if there are questions around seeing the world as it really is, for example, then there are far bigger conversations that need to be had about education within this country. And that is within both the state sector as well as independent sector. It is unhelpful to be pitting schools against each other, which is what this policy is doing. So as I say, hearing these stories, we were not alone. And I also looked at what Labor were saying. And they have also been very clear in terms of promises, but those promises are not adding up in terms of this policy, in my view. So Sir Keir Starmer has assured working families by saying, we will do nothing to increase the burden on working people, whether it comes to tax or anything else. They have paid a heavy price for the incompetence of the government of the last 13 years. I'm not going to comment in terms of government policies, but certainly from certainly from a global perspective, we've had a pandemic, we've had wars and cost of living crisis that has made life hard for all of us. I will also point out that Shadow Secretary Rachel Reeves has made an important argument here as well that is also very highly relevant. And she says, the tax burden is at its highest in 60, maybe 70 years. I don't see a route to funding public services that is through taxing our way there. It's going to be by growing our way there. And this is an important point because taxing is exactly what they are doing. They are trying to tax, 7%, the parents of 7% of students to try to fund support services for the other 93%. The other point I would add here is even the maths don't work, in my view. If you look at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, this is an argument, or this is the basis that Labor are using to make their arguments. And the IFS have said that only between 3 and 7% of students will actually move schools. A small figure, right? And so therefore, independent schools will be able to carry on as they are, and the government will continue to get the additional VAT, and it will go to all of the things that Labor have promised into state schools, presumably overnight. The problem is that if you take a closer look at the Institute for Fiscal Studies paper, and others have done this, I would point you to a blog called the Economics Blog by Mr. Chips, or Mr. Chips blog, that actually dissects a lot of this. And some of the assumptions, frankly, don't hold water, in my view. For example, it looks at school fee increases over several years in the early 2000s, right? And increasing school fees year on year is a different proposition to increasing school fees by 20% in one go. Moreover, the world of the 2000s was a different world than we have now. We've had a pandemic, we've got wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, we have a cost of living crisis, and people throughout the country are stretched, which is what I think Rachel Reeves was pointing at. Our tax burden is already so high, there's only so much room that you can go until people start changing their behaviors, and then you start reducing money that would come into the government, never mind the pain that people will bear through this. But this is exactly what's happening with the school fee VAT, because parents won't be able to absorb it. When the assumptions are as questionable as the IFS assumptions are and the points that I've made, and again, in my view. Also, I will point out that the IFS themselves have noted on about page 25 of the study that says that actually there are a lot of assumptions here. We cannot actually predict what will happen with independent schools because of the differences between them and also nationally. And also we are assuming that parents will continue working as they've worked, will continue, and also they've added that they'll just simply spend money that they would have spent on state school by going to the shops, and therefore the government getting more VAT through that route. So there are too many assumptions that the IFS note to make, which extending to my view, to make sound policy decisions. And it's important to get this right. And so that makes it all the more important to listen to schools, parents, teachers, those on the ground, and understand what they might do. And several schools have already been speaking with their parents, as they must, and trying to understand what the repercussions might be for this kind of policy. And there are schools, there's an article just recently in the Telegraph to back this, that estimate up to a third of parents may take their children out of these schools. That is very threatening for many schools, especially smaller schools. There was an article in a Litchfield newspaper or online source that pointed to cathedral schools and a worry there. And so there are wider knock-on effects. What will happen to those children? Perhaps some of them will move on to other independent schools. Others are going to go to state schools on top of those that actually have left because they can't afford it. And then the question is, what happens? What's the effect of this on state schools? Now, councils may say at a high level they've got enough places to accommodate students. But then when you start drilling down, you take a closer look at individual schools, and you find that you're going to have many problems, especially in popular schools. And so as it is, you look and see the available places, and there are none. And that means that students are going to be placed wherever there is a place, and that meets a council's statutory responsibility for educating their child. But the problem is going to come years down the road, and also for parents planning for future years. The problem will come when parents decide with school fee VAT, the sums no longer add up. And so what they will do is move house to live in near a popular state school, or tutor their children to pass the 11 plus, and therefore continue their education in the state sector, but hardly in the idea of the state sector that Labour seemed to have in mind. And that's a very important point to understand here. There is a systematic effect on this, and it's pitting school against school, when we ought to be having schools work together and sharing what works. And by this, I mean state schools working with other state schools to share what works, independent schools sharing with state schools as well. And there are partnerships already doing this. And I think those should be celebrated and learned from. And we cannot do that if we are dividing parents between each other and schools between each other. And I really worry about how well education will improve, not only in terms of the finances, given that the revenue projections are based on such broad assumptions and questionable assumptions in my view, but also because of what's happening in the culture. Will schools cooperate in the way that they had before at a time when they absolutely must? So to that end, we wanted to continue this conversation across the country. And so a small group of parents have put together a website called Education Not Taxation, Parents Against School Fee VAT. And our website is www.educationnot.taxation.org, all one word. And we can send, there is a link to this in the chat as well. And so this website provides more information in terms of who we are and also why we've done this. It shares family stories as well. It also looks at the maths underpinning the decisions that, at least that we've seen publicly, that the Labour Party are using to justify this policy. I also wanted to point out that this group is a non-party political group, this is a non-party political group, and so we are very much focused on the policy itself. We want to work with MPs and candidates across the political spectrum with the focus of trying to improve education and to make the point that this is not the right way to do it. This is going to hurt children at the end of the day. And so we want to have this website provides us a platform. Now within it, there's also a link to a Facebook group for parents to be able to come together and share ideas. Again, very much focused on the policy, not into party politics. And also there's a Twitter page and a YouTube page where we will have videos as well to continue these stories. So that launches this, and that's what today is about. But also it's the start of a bigger conversation. So this is something where we ask as a group of parents, all of you as parents seeing this and beyond, who are affected by this issue, to share your stories, share your concerns, to within your communities, with MPs, with party candidates. Share your stories, because there is a very limited understanding, I believe, in terms of the effects of this policy, and frankly, just who ends up in independent schools and how it fits within the wider education ecosystem. The fact that independent and state schools rely on each other. You have children in state schools that may move into, say, state primary schools who move into independent senior schools. You have children in independent prep schools who are moving into senior state schools and vice versa. And you have to recognize that sort of reliance upon each other. And good schools require students to have been able to learn well within their schools and with other schools in order to actually improve education for all and to ensure that communities and ultimately the country has the skills and knowledge to be able to thrive in a very rapidly changing world. So we ultimately would ask you to share your stories. Get in touch with us on educationnottaxation.org. Sign the petition, consider signing it and sharing it with families and friends. Speak with people in your community groups, religious groups. Speak on local Facebook pages, or write pieces in your local newspapers. Contact national newspapers and share your stories about why this matters. Labour have listened to other groups For example, they were listening to business leaders and others as they were shaping tax policy. And they made some very difficult decisions for them as a party. For example, after the Truss government had repealed or removed the 45p tax band, the natural reaction was to call for its restoration. But after many conversations in what Labour had called a smoked salmon and scrambled eggs initiative, Labour met with business leaders and others. And after listening to their concerns, came to a different conclusion. And that's what brought about Shadow Chancellor Reeves' statement that I presented earlier, and saying, look, we cannot fix the scale of problems that we've got simply by raising taxes and expecting to have enough money to fund our public services. And I think it should go without saying that education goes along the same way. And it is one of the most vital public services that we have. It shapes our country at the end of the day. And so finally, I would like to call on Sir Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and Bridget Phillipson. I would like to welcome them to a breakfast wherein they can meet my family and others to hear our stories and understand why this issue is so vitally important to us and to how much it will transform our lives. You know, I will do my best for scrambled smoked salmon and eggs, trying to save up for the VAT risks, but in the least we can certainly do bacon and eggs, and would love to meet them and give them an opportunity to speak with families that are very afraid about the effects of this policy, very worried for their families. And so that's where we are today. I thank you all for taking the time to listen so far, and would be pleased to take any questions that you might have. Thank you all very much, and take care. And please again, visit our website, education.taxation.org.